they're missing 3 members of the minority. Congress should be required by amendment to actually follow the rules they make. Yeah, this is the thing, though. Say they don't have to. Because Congress is the sole judge of its own rules. So that's easy. Like, if you want to ask, is Congress in compliance with its own rules, ask Congress. Because the Constitution says that. It's in the Constitution. So each house is in charge of its own rules. So if the rules say, okay, we're supposed to have so many members of the majority and so many members of the minority, as long as the House itself is the one that creates the committee, they don't have to follow their own rules because they're the House's rules, and they can waive their own rules. So yeah, it's a total non-starter. The rules are only binding on the House as long as they want them to be, because they're the sole judge of their own rules. So yeah. I disagree. An invalid committee have a valid subpoena. It's not an invalid committee, unfortunately, because as I mentioned, and this is going to law, right? This is law. Each house is in charge of its own rules. So the U.S. House of Representatives has a set of rules. These rules say things like, for example, there's supposed to be so many people from the minority on the committee. Okay, but they're the House's rules. So as long as the House by majority votes, then it's a valid committee, because the rules only bind the House, which the House can ignore. That each house is the judge of its own rules. So as long as you've got a majority of the House to do something, their own internal rules to the contrary are not an impediment. The courts will never step in ever, because it's solely committed to the House by the Constitution. So you can't go to court and be like, they didn't follow their own internal rules. The court won't entertain that. It's literally a political question. Yes, they have to follow their own rules. Whoever made the rule is in number one obligation to follow the rule. A judge could make the ruling if he wished to. Much of the judge ruling is not math, but judge desire. Well, let's talk about what I think they're supposed to do. I'm an originalist, right? I'm a textualist. I think that we should follow the Constitution. Hopefully you think we should follow the Constitution too. The Constitution says that each house is the sole judge of its own rules. That literally means that I as a judge have no power. If they are the sole judge, I have no power. So I can't. I literally can't. I have no power. Now, I guess a judge can ignore the Constitution, but we're not supposed to do that, remember? We're supposed to obey the Constitution. So, no, a judge really can't do that. It's unconstitutional. Dacker says, so you think that there should be just vastly different rules when new groups get in? I don't think that. The United States Constitution thinks that. I mean, are we applying the Constitution or not? I'm an originalist. I want to apply the Constitution. So it's not so much that I think that there should be new rules when new groups comes in, as the Constitution says that. So if a new house wants to create completely new rules, cool. If they want to ignore their own rules by majority, cool. That's what that means. They are the sole judge of their own rules. So it's not so much that I think they should be able to, that as so much as the Constitution says, and I'm a judge and I'm applying the Constitution. So I have no choice. Incidentally, when we elect a president, they're going to bring in an entirely new administration who may want very radically different things than the last presidential administration. This is the nature of politics. It's not for me to say. It's, the president that you elected. It's the Congress that you elected. There was a process. They got appointed. Okay, well, they're the ones that get to create the rules now. Elections have consequences, amazingly enough. The House has to vote on rules. If they aren't following the rules, the court should intervene. And so check on the power, especially when the court is asked to enforce the legality of subpoenas. Yeah, the problem is the interpretation of the rules. This, incidentally, also was used for the nuclear option, for killing the filibuster in the Senate, for judges. This is how this was done, by the way, in case you're curious. It was the same exact thing. So it's interesting just to go through this. All right. So originally it was Harry Reid. Harry Reid would like the U.S. Senate to be able to vote on federal judges without a filibuster. Harry Reid says, so there's some federal judges who are pending, not for the Supreme Court at the time. This is the Democrats. No, is it Harry Reid? Yeah, it's Harry Reid. Harry Reid, there's some nominees pending for the federal bench that Harry Reid would like to vote on. The Republicans are filibustering him. He says, okay, I'd like to vote on him anyway. Now, in order to change the rule, at least under the Senate rules, and I don't know the House rules this much, I don't know what's required to change the rules in the House, but I'll give you the Senate rules because it's interesting. Under the Senate rules, in order to change the rules, you need to be able to beat the filibuster, right? So if you want to change the rules of the Senate, you need to be able to break the filibuster in order to change the rules of the Senate. So Harry Reid can't change the rules of the Senate because he can't get the thing he's trying to solve in the first place is being able to get these judges confirmed without a filibuster. And of course, the Republicans aren't going to agree to changing the rule, so he can't get the rule changed. No problem. We move on to option number 2. How do we interpret the rule, right? Because what does the rule mean, right? Someone has to decide what the rule means. And as I mentioned, each house is the sole judge of its own rules. So this is what they call the nuclear option, right? Harry Reid says, okay, the rule says, this basically is the bottom line, I'm paraphrasing. Harry Reid says, the rule says, in order to get a federal judge confirmed on the bench, we have to be able to meet the filibuster. I think that means exactly the opposite of that. I think that means in order for us to get a federal judge confirmed, we don't have to pass the filibuster, right? This is what's going on. The rule says in order to get a judge confirmed, you need to be able to meet the filibuster. I think that means you don't need to meet the filibuster. I think it means exactly the opposite of that. Okay, so the parliamentarian of the Senate, who is a full-time professional and very, very good at their job, incidentally, the parliamentarian of the Senate takes a look at the rule and says, I think when it says you need to be able to pass the filibuster, I don't agree. I don't think it means that you don't need to be able to pass the filibuster. I think it means you do need to be able to pass the filibuster because what it says is you need to be able to pass the filibuster, and I am interpreting that to mean you have to pass the filibuster. So this is where Harry Reid gets up and does the nuclear option. He does this thing and says, I challenge the decision of the chair. It's in Robert's Rules of Order, incidentally, in case you're curious about something. I challenge the decision of the chair. Okay? So now we have to have a vote on whether or not the chair's interpretation is correct or not. And that vote only requires a majority. That vote only requires a majority. So we asked the Senate collectively, hey, Senate, collectively, when it says you need to be able to when it says we need to be able to confirm a judge, in order to do that, we need to pass the filibuster. Does that mean that you don't have to pass the filibuster? And 51 members of the Senate said that's exactly what that means. When it says you have to pass the filibuster, what that means is you don't have to pass the filibuster. And bingo bango, that's now the proper interpretation of the rule. Because each house is the sole judge of its own rules. So the rule that says you have to pass the filibuster means you don't have to pass the filibuster. Right? And then, of course, somewhat famously, Mitch McConnell says to Harry Reid, you're going to wind up regretting this. Fast forward like 3 years later, and Mitch McConnell is doing the exact same thing when it comes to the U.S. Supreme Court nominees. Right? And everyone's votes flip. Everyone's votes flip, right? Of course they do. Right? 3 years earlier, all the Republicans said, hey, the rule says we need the filibuster. Fast forward 3 years later, and we'd like to get a Supreme Court justice confirmed. The rule says we need the super filibuster. The Republicans say no, we don't. And so they go to the parliamentarian who's very good at his job, and it says, well, do we need it or not? It says, well, it says you need a filibuster, and the Republicans are like, I appeal the decision of the chair. 51 votes. The proper interpretation is I don't need a filibuster. And that is completely unappealable at that point because each house is the sole judge of its own rules. So I don't know the degree to which the House had to do this machination or not, but the House can, by majority vote, one way or another, ignore its own rules. They either change the rule or they create a special rule just for now, which is often what they do. Right? We'll create a special rule, a new special rule just for this one time, which you can do. Or they ignore the rule, which you can do, or any of those things. And because the Constitution commits it to each house as the sole judge of its rules, it's completely unappealable. And there's nothing for the judicial branch to do. So this is how we got members of the U.S. Supreme Court confirmed. This is how we got federal judges confirmed. This is how we get the Select Committee confirmed. This is how we're doing things. We are making everything up on the fly, which we can do because the law allows for it. This brief history lesson has been brought to you by Uncivil Law. The whole committee system is not in the Constitution. That's true. The committee system is not in the Constitution. But then again, what did I tell you? The rules of each house is up to the House. So, are there committees? I don't know. Consult the rules. Oh, the rules say they're committees. Oh, okay. There are committees now. That was easy. Right? So, yeah.